The doctors said he had everything money could buy. They were wrong. The mansion was so quiet that night, I could hear the grandfather clock 3 rooms away. Tick, tick, tick. Each sound echoed through the endless hallways like a reminder that I didn't belong there. My name is Grace Miller, and 3 months earlier, I had walked through those front gates carrying a second-hand suitcase and a cleaning uniform that was one size too big. Back then, I thought the biggest challenge would be surviving my first week working for Ethan Blackwood, the billionaire everyone in New York seemed to know and nobody seemed to understand. But on that cold November night, none of that mattered. Because Ethan Blackwood was lying on the floor of his private study, and if I didn't act fast, he might never stand up again. It started with a sound. A crash. Sharp. Heavy. Wrong. I was finishing my evening duties on the 2nd floor when it happened. At first I froze, gripping the banister. The mansion was over 20,000 square feet. Sounds carried strangely, but something about this one made the hairs on my arms stand up. Then came silence. Not normal silence. The kind that makes your stomach tighten. I hurried downstairs, my sneakers barely making a sound against the polished hardwood floors. Every lamp in the hallway cast long golden shadows across the walls. The house looked beautiful, expensive, empty. The study door was half open. "Mr. Blackwood?" I called softly. No answer. My heart started pounding. I pushed the door wider. Ethan was on the floor beside his desk, one hand pressed against his chest, his face pale, his breathing shallow. For a second, I forgot he was one of the richest men in America. Forgot the private jets. Forgot the magazine covers. Forgot the stories people whispered about him. All I saw was a man who needed help. "Mr. Blackwood." I dropped to my knees beside him. His eyes opened slightly. Green. Tired. Unfocused. "Grace," he whispered. It was the first time he had ever said my name. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. My hands trembled so badly I nearly dropped it. The operator answered. I forced myself to stay calm. Forced myself to remember every first aid class I had ever taken. The next few minutes felt like hours. I stayed beside him, talking even when he didn't answer. Telling him to keep breathing. Telling him help was coming. Telling him he wasn't alone. Outside, rain tapped softly against the massive windows. Inside, the clock continued its steady rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. Finally, Ethan looked at me again. There was something strange in his expression. Not fear. Not pain. Something deeper. Loneliness. The kind that doesn't disappear no matter how much money sits in your bank account. His lips moved. Barely. "Don't leave." The words were almost impossible to hear. But I heard them. And in that moment, before the sirens arrived, before the doctors came rushing through the front doors, before either of us knew how much our lives were about to change, I made a promise to a man I barely knew. "I'm right here," I whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." 3 days later, the smell of fresh coffee drifted through the mansion as sunlight spilled across the marble floors. Ethan Blackwood was alive. The doctors called it a warning. They said stress, exhaustion, and years of neglecting his own health had finally caught up with him. The staff called it a miracle. I called it luck. Because if I had decided to finish folding laundry before checking that noise, everything might have ended differently. I stood in the kitchen staring at a tray of breakfast items while Mrs. Whitmore, the head housekeeper, adjusted her glasses and lowered her voice. "You should not be carrying that upstairs." I looked at her. "Why not?" She glanced toward the ceiling. "Because Mr. Blackwood does not like people in his personal space." I almost laughed. 3 nights ago, I had been sitting beside him on the study floor waiting for an ambulance. Personal space seemed like a strange concern now. Still, I picked up the tray carefully. Toast. Fruit. Black coffee. The elevator carried me to the 3rd floor. The mansion felt different during the day. Less intimidating. Less haunted. But only slightly. When I reached his bedroom door, my stomach tightened. I knocked softly. "Come in." His voice was stronger than I expected. I pushed open the door. The room was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Hudson River. Everything was neat. Perfect. Cold. Ethan sat near the window wearing a gray sweater instead of the expensive suits I was used to seeing. For the first time since I had met him, he looked like an ordinary man. Tired. Human. "Good morning," I said. The kitchen sent breakfast. His eyes followed me as I set down the tray. "The kitchen sent it." I smiled slightly. "Fine. I brought breakfast." Something almost resembling amusement touched the corner of his mouth. "Almost. Thank you." The words surprised me more than they should have. The stories about Ethan Blackwood always described a man who commanded, demanded, controlled. Nobody ever mentioned gratitude. I turned to leave. Grace. I stopped. Yes. He looked out the window for a moment before speaking. How long have you worked here? Almost 3 months. And before that, a diner in Queens. A bookstore before that. A grocery store before that. His expression shifted. You have had a lot of jobs. Bills have a way of showing up every month. This time he actually smiled. Briefly. Gone almost before I saw it. But it was there. Silence settled between us. Comfortable silence. Unexpected silence. Then my eyes landed on a framed photograph sitting beside the bed. A woman with bright eyes and a warm smile stood beside a younger Ethan. They looked happy. Truly happy. The kind of happiness that cannot be purchased. Before I could stop myself, I asked, was she your wife? The room instantly felt different. Ethan's smile disappeared. His gaze returned to the photograph. The sunlight still filled the room, but somehow everything felt colder. Several seconds passed before he answered. Yes. His voice was quiet. Her name was Claire. The way he said her name told me everything. Some people lose loved ones. Others lose entire pieces of themselves. And for the first time since arriving at Blackwood Manor, I began to understand that the loneliest person in the house was not one of the servants. It was the man who owned everything. The next week passed quietly, but not normally. Something had changed inside the mansion. I could feel it every time I walked through the hallways. Every employee could. The atmosphere that had once felt frozen now carried the faintest hint of warmth. It started with small things. Ethan began eating breakfast downstairs instead of alone in his room. He started thanking people. Not often, not dramatically, just enough for everyone to notice. One afternoon, I was dusting shelves in the library when I heard voices drifting in from the hallway. 2 executives from his company had arrived for a meeting. Their polished shoes clicked against the marble floor as they followed Ethan toward his office. The board is concerned, one of them said carefully. Concerned about what? Ethan asked. You have canceled 3 investor dinners this month. There was a pause. Perhaps because I was recovering from a medical emergency. Neither man answered. The silence told me everything. A few seconds later, the office door closed. I returned to work. Rich people had different problems than the rest of us, but somehow they still looked exhausting. That evening, I was arranging books in the library when Ethan appeared in the doorway. He looked tired again. Not physically, emotionally, like someone carrying a weight nobody else could see. Do you always reorganize books when nobody asks you to? He asked. I glanced at the shelves. Only when they are arranged terribly. His eyebrow lifted. Terribly. Someone organized these by color. He looked around. And books are not decorations. They are books. For a moment, he simply stared at me. Then something unexpected happened. He laughed. An actual laugh. Short. Genuine. Human. I nearly dropped the book in my hands. What? He asked. Nothing. Grace. I have just never heard you laugh before. He shook his head. Maybe nobody has given me a reason recently. The words lingered in the room after he spoke them. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. The library lights cast warm reflections across the polished wood shelves. It felt strangely peaceful. Then my eyes landed on a photograph sitting on a side table. A little girl stood beside Ethan. She could not have been older than 8. Blonde hair. Bright smile. The same green eyes. Your daughter? I asked. His expression softened immediately. Emily. She is beautiful. She does not smile much anymore. The sadness in his voice caught me off guard. How old is she now? 11. Where is she? Ethan looked toward the staircase beyond the hallway. Upstairs. Usually reading alone. Something about that answer bothered me. An 11-year-old should have friends. Laughter. Noise. Life. Not isolation inside a mansion big enough to get lost in. Ethan followed my gaze. She has had a difficult few years. I nodded slowly. I understood more than he realized. Loss changes adults. But it changes children differently. They learn how to hide their pain before they learn how to understand it. Ethan started toward the door, then stopped. Grace. Yes. He hesitated. Thank you. For what? His eyes moved across the library. The books. The room. The quiet. Then back to me. For speaking to me like I am a person. Before I could answer, he walked away. And for the first time since arriving at Blackwood Manor, I began to suspect that the man everyone admired for his success might actually be the loneliest person I had ever met. The first time I met Emily Blackwood, she was hiding behind a bookshelf. I did not see her at first. I only noticed a pair of green eyes watching me from the narrow gap between two shelves in the library. The afternoon sunlight poured through the tall windows, turning the dust in the air into tiny floating sparks. I pretended not to notice her. Children who spend too much time alone usually hate being cornered. So I continued arranging books, humming softly to myself as if the room belonged entirely to me. A few minutes passed. Then I heard a page turn. I glanced up. Emily was sitting in a reading chair near the window now, a thick novel resting in her lap. She could not have moved more than 10 feet, but somehow it felt like progress. "That book is sad," I said. She looked at me cautiously. "Have you read it?" "Twice." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Why would anyone read a sad book twice?" "Because sometimes people understand different things the second time." She studied me for a moment before looking back down at the pages. It was not much of a conversation, but it was more than I expected. The next day, I found her in the same chair. The day after that, too. Slowly, a routine formed between us. We talked about books, about movies, about why pineapple absolutely did not belong on pizza. That last conversation lasted nearly 20 minutes. I considered it a major victory. One rainy Saturday afternoon, I was carrying fresh towels upstairs when I heard music coming from one of the unused sitting rooms. Curious, I followed the sound. Emily sat alone at an old piano near the window. Her fingers moved carefully across the keys. The melody was beautiful but hesitant, like someone afraid of making mistakes. She stopped the moment she noticed me. "Sorry," I said. "I did not mean to interrupt." "You were not." Her voice was quiet. "My mother used to play this song." The words settled heavily between us. I walked closer, but not too close. "Was she good?" Emily nodded. "She could play anything." She looked down at the piano keys. "Dad cannot listen to it anymore." My chest tightened. "Why not?" "Because it reminds him of her." Rain tapped softly against the glass. Somewhere downstairs a clock chimed the hour. Emily stared at the keys. "Sometimes I think he misses her so much that he forgets I miss her too." I did not know what to say. There are moments when advice sounds hollow. Moments when the only thing you can offer is understanding. So I sat beside her in silence. After a while, she started playing again. A few notes at first, then the entire melody. When the final note faded, a voice spoke from the doorway behind us. That was beautiful. Both of us turned. Ethan stood there completely still. Emily froze. The room seemed to stop breathing. For a second, father and daughter simply stared at one another. Then something happened that neither of them expected. Ethan smiled. And for the first time since I had arrived at Blackwood Manor, Emily smiled back. After that afternoon, something shifted inside the mansion. It was subtle at first, the kind of change you only notice when you stop looking for it. Emily spent less time hiding in her room. Ethan spent less time locked inside his office. And somehow, without meaning to, I found myself caught in the middle of both worlds. A week later, the first snowfall of the season arrived. Large flakes drifted past the windows like tiny white feathers. The grounds beyond the mansion slowly disappeared beneath a blanket of white. I was polishing silver in the dining room when I heard laughter. Real laughter. Bright and unexpected. I followed the sound to the back terrace. Emily stood outside wearing a blue winter coat, attempting to build what could generously be called a snowman. The poor thing leaned so far to one side, it looked ready to surrender. "Do not laugh," she said the moment she saw me smiling. I was not laughing. "You absolutely were." "Maybe a little." She narrowed her eyes. "Then help." 20 minutes later, we were both covered in snow. The snowman looked slightly less tragic. Slightly. Emily stepped back to admire our work. "I think he looks distinguished." "I think he looks confused." "That too." Another laugh escaped her. I realized then how rare that sound had been only a few weeks earlier. The terrace door opened behind us. Ethan stepped outside wearing a dark wool coat. The cold wind tugged at his hair. He looked from Emily to the crooked snowman and then back to us. "Should I ask?" he said. "No." Emily answered immediately. "You should not." Ethan stared at the snowman for several seconds. "I see. Do not be rude," Emily warned. "He is doing his best." For a moment, silence hung between them. Then Ethan surprised both of us. He walked over, picked up a loose branch from the ground, and stuck it into the snowman as an arm. "There," he said. Now he looks employed." Emily burst out laughing. I did too. Even Ethan smiled. The sight felt so natural that it was easy to forget how impossible it would have seemed a month ago. Later that evening, I carried a basket of folded laundry upstairs. As I passed the study, I noticed the door was open. Ethan sat alone at his desk staring at a photograph. Claire. Even from the hallway, I recognized her smile. The happiness captured in that frame seemed to belong to another lifetime. I should have kept walking. Instead, I knocked softly. Ethan looked up. "Sorry," I said. "I did not mean to interrupt." He glanced at the photograph before setting it down. "You are not interrupting." I hesitated. "Emily had a good day." His expression softened immediately. I noticed. "She misses spending time with you." He leaned back in his chair. "I know." The admission sounded heavier than I expected. Then why not spend more time with her? The question escaped before I could stop it. For a moment, I regretted asking. But Ethan did not seem offended. Only thoughtful. "Because every time I look at her," he said quietly, "I see everything I almost lost." The room fell silent. Outside, snow continued falling beyond the dark windows. I looked at him carefully. "Maybe she sees the same thing when she looks at you." Ethan did not answer, but the look in his eyes told me he had never considered that possibility before. The following Friday, something happened that nobody in the mansion could remember ever seeing before. Ethan Blackwood came home before sunset. Normally, his schedule stretched long into the evening. Meetings, calls, endless responsibilities that seemed to consume every hour of his life. But that afternoon, as golden winter lights spilled across the front driveway, his black sedan rolled through the gates while the sky was still bright. I was helping Mrs. Whitmore prepare dinner when she noticed the car through the kitchen window. "That is unusual," she murmured. "What is?" I asked. "Mr. Blackwood being home before dark." A few minutes later, I understood why. Emily came racing into the kitchen with excitement written all over her face. "He is taking me to dinner." Mrs. Whitmore nearly dropped a serving spoon. "Dinner?" Emily nodded. "Just us." Then she disappeared upstairs before either of us could say another word. I stood there smiling. Mrs. Whitmore looked suspiciously emotional. "What?" I asked. She shook her head. "Nothing." But it clearly was not nothing. 2 hours later, the mansion felt strangely empty. Quiet. Peaceful. I spent the evening organizing storage closets on the second floor. Around 9 o'clock, I heard the front doors open. Voices followed. Light. Happy voices. I glanced down from the staircase. Ethan and Emily stood in the foyer. Emily was talking so fast that half her words blended together. And then the waiter dropped the menu and Dad laughed, and everybody looked at us, and she stopped suddenly when she noticed me standing above them. "Grace," she called. "We had the best night." Ethan loosened his coat and looked up. There was color in his face that had not been there before. "I can see that." Emily hurried upstairs, still talking about dessert, leaving the two of us alone in the foyer. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Snow drifted softly beyond the glass doors. The chandelier cast warm light across the marble floor. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "You were right." "About what?" "About Emily." I tilted my head. "That narrows it down to approximately 100 conversations." To my surprise, he laughed again. It was becoming less rare now. "You said she needed me." His expression softened. "You were right." I leaned against the banister. "Children usually do." Ethan looked toward the staircase where Emily had disappeared. I spent years convincing myself that giving her everything was enough. And it was not. His voice carried a quiet honesty that caught me off guard. "She never wanted everything." He paused. "She just wanted me." Neither of us spoke for several seconds. The truth hung between us. Simple, painful, real. Then Ethan looked directly at me. "How do you always know what to say?" I smiled. "I do not. It seems like you do. Maybe people are easier to understand than you think." His gaze lingered on me longer than usual. Not uncomfortable, just thoughtful, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Then he nodded slowly. "Perhaps." He turned toward the staircase before stopping halfway across the foyer. "Grace." "Yes." "Tomorrow night. Join us for dinner." My heart skipped slightly. "Dinner? Emily will insist anyway." A faint smile appeared. "And honestly, so will I." The next evening, I almost canceled. Sitting at the same dinner table as one of the most powerful men in New York still felt strange no matter how many times Emily insisted I was part of the household now. But Emily would not accept excuses. At exactly 6:30, she appeared outside the kitchen carrying a determined expression that looked remarkably similar to her father's. "You are coming," she announced. That was not a question. 30 minutes later, the three of us sat in the formal dining room beneath a chandelier that probably cost more than every car I had ever owned combined. Yet somehow the evening felt surprisingly normal. Emily talked about a school project. Ethan listened, really listened. I found myself smiling more than speaking. For the first time since I had arrived at the mansion, the enormous room felt less like a museum and more like a home. After dinner, Emily disappeared upstairs to finish homework. Ethan received a phone call and stepped into his office. I volunteered to return a few books to the library before ending my shift. The mansion was quiet. Soft music drifted from hidden speakers somewhere in the walls. Outside, snow reflected the moonlight, turning the ground silver. As I carried the stack of books through the west wing, I noticed a door slightly open at the end of the hallway. That immediately caught my attention because every other door in that section remained locked. Always. Curiosity got the better of me. I approached slowly and pushed the door wider. The room beyond looked untouched by time. My breath caught. Pale blue curtains framed tall windows. A vase of dried flowers rested on a small table. Shelves lined one wall. Photographs covered another. Everywhere I looked, there were traces of a woman I had never met but somehow felt I knew. Claire. Her smile appeared in nearly every frame. Claire laughing on a beach. Claire holding a baby Emily. Claire standing beside Ethan with sunlight in her hair. The room felt warm and sad at the same time, like a memory refusing to fade. I stepped farther inside. On a nearby desk sat a leather journal. Beside it rested a framed photograph I had never seen before. Claire stood in a hospital room holding newborn Emily, while Ethan looked at both of them with complete wonder. The expression on his face startled me. I had never seen that version of him. Not the billionaire, not the businessman, just a husband and father completely in love with his family. "Nobody comes in here." Ethan's voice broke the silence behind me. I turned so quickly my heart nearly stopped. He stood in the doorway, not angry, not cold, just still. His eyes moved around the room before settling on the photograph in my hands. "I am sorry," I said quietly. The door was open. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Ethan walked into the room. His gaze lingered on the photographs. The journal. The flowers. "I have not changed anything," he admitted. "Not in 5 years." The sadness in his voice felt heavier than anything I had heard before. I looked around the room again and finally understood. This was not a room. It was a moment frozen in time. And somehow, standing there beside him, I realized that Ethan Blackwood had never truly left the day he lost Claire. For the next few days, I could not stop thinking about that room. Everywhere I went inside the mansion, pieces of it stayed with me. The photographs, the flowers, the silence. More than anything, the look on Ethan's face when he stood among those memories. It was the look of someone who had built an entire life around not moving forward. One snowy afternoon, I was helping Emily with a history assignment in the library when Ethan walked in carrying a stack of documents. He looked distracted, tired. The old heaviness had returned to his eyes. "Dad," Emily said, "you promised you would come to my school concert next Friday." Ethan stopped. "Friday?" "Yes." Emily's smile faded slightly. "You said you would be there." He glanced at the papers in his hands. "I have an international conference that day." The room grew quiet. I watched Emily's shoulders sink. It was a small movement, but it felt enormous. "Oh," she said softly. "Maybe next time." Ethan immediately looked uncomfortable. "Emily, it is okay." She forced a smile that did not reach her eyes. "I understand." Then she gathered her books and left the room. The moment she disappeared, silence filled the space she left behind. Ethan rubbed a hand across his face. "I am doing this for her." The words sounded like something he had repeated to himself many times. I closed the history book. "Can I be honest?" He looked up. "You usually are." I took a slow breath. "I think you are wrong." His eyebrows lifted. Most people would never have spoken to him that way. I knew that. But pretending was not helping anyone. "Wrong. You keep saying everything is for Emily." I gestured toward the door. "But she does not need another business deal. She does not need another investment account." Ethan's expression tightened. "You do not understand the responsibilities I carry." "Maybe not." I met his gaze. "But I understand what it feels like when someone you love keeps choosing something else." The words landed harder than I intended. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Snow drifted outside the tall windows. Somewhere in the distance, a clock chimed. Ethan stared at me with an expression I could not read. Finally, he spoke. "You think I am failing her?" "No," my voice softened. "I think you are afraid." That surprised him. I could see it immediately. Afraid of what? Afraid that if you stop working long enough to be happy, you will somehow be betraying Claire. The room went completely still. Ethan looked away first. His jaw tightened. The silence stretched between us. Then he quietly set the documents down on a nearby table. For the first time since I had met him, he looked less like a billionaire and more like a man carrying a burden he could no longer hold alone. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You should not know me that well." But the truth was, neither of us could ignore it anymore. The school concert was 4 days away. Emily never mentioned it again after that conversation in the library, but I noticed the change immediately. She still smiled. She still read books and practiced piano after dinner. Yet something quieter had settled over her. The kind of disappointment children learn to hide because they do not want to seem difficult. Ethan noticed it too. I could tell by the way his eyes followed her whenever she left a room. But he never brought up the concert again. Neither did she. On Wednesday evening, I was organizing decorations in a storage room when Mrs. Whitmore appeared in the doorway holding a cardboard box. "I found these in the attic," she said. "Mr. Blackwood asked that they be moved to his office." I opened the box and immediately recognized Claire. Photographs, old letters, scrapbooks, memories carefully packed away years earlier. I carried the box upstairs and knocked on Ethan's office door. "Come in." He sat behind his desk reviewing paperwork. The moment he saw the box, his expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough. "The attic?" he asked. "Mrs. Whitmore found it." Ethan nodded slowly. I set the box on a nearby table and turned to leave. "Grace." I stopped. "Yes." He stared at the box for several seconds. "Stay a moment." I sat across from him while he opened it. Dust floated through the warm light of the desk lamp. One by one, he lifted the contents. Photographs from vacations, birthday cards, handwritten notes. Then he paused. His hand froze over a folded letter. Carefully, he opened it. I watched his eyes move across the page. The silence stretched longer and longer. Finally, he lowered the letter. "What is it?" I asked softly. Ethan looked down at the paper again. "Claire wrote this 6 months before she passed away." His voice sounded distant. "I never read it." "Why not?" A sad smile touched his face. "Because I was too busy." The words landed like stones. He handed me the letter. I hesitated before reading. The handwriting was elegant and warm. Most of it described ordinary things. Emily losing a tooth. A family trip they planned to take. Small moments. Then my eyes found the final paragraph. "Ethan, if you ever read this years from now, I hope you are not spending all your time working. I hope you are making memories with Emily. I hope you are laughing. I hope you remember that life is happening while you are busy planning for it." By the time I finished reading, the room was completely silent. Ethan stared out the window into the darkness beyond the glass. "She used to tell me that all the time," he said quietly, and I never listened. I carefully folded the letter and returned it to him. "Maybe it is not too late." Ethan let out a slow breath. 5 years feels late. For some things. I looked toward the family photographs spread across his desk. Not for everything. He said nothing, but his gaze drifted toward a framed picture of Emily laughing on a summer beach years earlier. The next morning, I woke up to unexpected news. Ethan Blackwood had canceled his international conference, and nobody in the mansion could believe why. Friday arrived wrapped in fresh snow and pale winter sunlight. From the moment I woke up, the mansion felt different. There was an energy in the air that nobody could quite explain. Staff members whispered in hallways. Phones rang. Schedules changed. Yet the biggest surprise belonged to Emily. She did not know her father had canceled the conference. Not yet. When she came downstairs for breakfast, she looked nervous. Excited, but nervous. She kept smoothing imaginary wrinkles from her sweater and checking the time every few minutes. "You are going to wear a hole in the floor if you keep pacing like that," I told her. Emily rolled her eyes. "Easy for you to say. You are going to be wonderful. What if I forget everything? Then you smile and keep going." She sighed dramatically. That sounds suspiciously reasonable. By late afternoon, the sky had turned silver. Parents began arriving at the school auditorium. I sat beside Mrs. Whitmore near the back. Emily and the other students waited behind the curtain. The room buzzed with conversation and camera flashes. But one seat in the front row remained empty. I noticed it immediately. So did Emily. From backstage, her eyes kept drifting toward that seat. My heart sank. Maybe Ethan had changed his mind. Maybe business had won again. The lights dimmed. The audience quieted. The performance was about to begin. Then, just seconds before the curtain opened, the auditorium doors swung wide. A tall figure stepped inside, slightly out of breath. Snow clung to the shoulders of his dark coat. Ethan. Relief washed across my chest so quickly it almost hurt. He scanned the room, found the empty seat, and slipped into it just as the first notes of music began. From backstage, Emily saw him. I watched her entire face light up. It happened in an instant. The worry disappeared. The uncertainty vanished. She smiled so brightly that several parents nearby noticed. Then the curtain opened. The performance lasted nearly an hour. Children sang, played instruments, read poetry. Most people would probably forget the details by the following week. But for Emily, it became something she would remember forever. Every time she glanced toward the audience, Ethan was there. Watching, smiling, present. When the concert ended, parents flooded the stage area. Flowers appeared. Cameras flashed. Excited voices filled the auditorium. I stayed near the back, letting families have their moment. A few minutes later, I spotted Ethan and Emily standing together near the stage steps. Emily threw her arms around him without hesitation. Ethan hugged her back just as tightly. Neither seemed to care who was watching. For a moment, the crowd faded away. They looked like what they had always been beneath the grief and distance. A father and daughter finding their way back to each other. Then Ethan looked up and found me across the room. His expression softened. There was gratitude there, but something else too. Something deeper. Something neither of us had spoken aloud. As people continued celebrating around us, he held my gaze for several seconds before looking away. And for the first time, I realized the biggest change happening inside that family might not be Emily or Ethan at all. It might be me. The week after the concert should have felt happy. In many ways, it was. Emily seemed lighter. Ethan smiled more often. Even the staff moved through the mansion with a different energy. Yet beneath all of it, something inside me had started to change. The closer I became to the Blackwood family, the harder it became to ignore a simple truth. I did not belong there. One Monday morning, I received a phone call while organizing linens in the laundry room. The number was unfamiliar. Normally, I would have ignored it. For some reason, I answered. By the time the conversation ended, I was sitting on a folding chair staring at the floor. The opportunity was everything I had worked for. Months earlier, before I ever stepped inside Blackwood Manor, I had applied for a community outreach position at a literacy foundation in Boston. A real career, better pay, benefits, a chance to build something meaningful. I had never expected them to call back. Yet they had, and they wanted me to start in 3 weeks. For the rest of the day, the news followed me everywhere. Through hallways, through conversations, through dinner preparations. By evening, my excitement had been replaced by something much more complicated. Anxiety. That night, I found myself standing alone in the library. Snow drifted softly beyond the windows. The familiar room felt different now. Smaller somehow, like I was already beginning to leave it behind. "You are thinking very loudly." Ethan's voice came from the doorway. I turned. Is that a skill? It is when someone has the same expression for 6 straight hours. Despite myself, I smiled. Ethan walked farther into the room. What happened? For a moment, I considered lying. Then I remembered that honesty had become the foundation of every important conversation we had ever shared. I got a job offer. The smile disappeared from his face. Not dramatically, just enough for me to notice. A job offer? In Boston. Silence followed. Ethan looked toward the window. I see. The words sounded calm. Too calm. It is a good opportunity, I said quietly. I know. I have not accepted yet. His gaze shifted back to me. But you want to? I swallowed. Yes. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked steadily through the silence. Finally, Ethan nodded. Then you should take it. I waited for him to say more. He did not. That is all. I asked. What would you like me to say? His voice remained polite. Controlled. You earned this opportunity. You should be proud. The answer was perfect. Reasonable. Mature. It should have comforted me. Instead, it hurt. Because for the first time since I had arrived at Blackwood Manor, Ethan sounded like the man he used to be. Distant. Guarded. Untouchable. A few minutes later, he excused himself and left the library. I stood there long after he was gone. Upstairs, a door quietly closed. Somewhere down the hallway, Emily laughed at something on television. Life continued moving forward. But deep down, I could not shake the feeling that the moment I walked out of that mansion, something important would break. The only question was whether Ethan Blackwood realized it yet. The next 2 weeks passed faster than I wanted. Every morning brought me one day closer to leaving. Every evening felt more difficult than the one before. The strange part was that nobody talked about it. Not really. Emily knew I had accepted the position in Boston. Ethan knew too. Yet somehow the subject floated around the mansion like a storm cloud nobody wanted to acknowledge. One night, I found Emily sitting alone in the library. A book rested open in her lap, but she was not reading it. She stared out the window at the snow-covered grounds. "You are upset," I said gently. "No, I am not." "Emily." She sighed dramatically. "Fine. Maybe a little." I sat beside her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she closed the book. "Everybody leaves eventually." The words hit harder than she probably realized. "Not everybody. Mom did." Her voice softened. "And now you are." I wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Boston is only a few hours away. That is still too far." I smiled sadly. "You are going to do amazing things, Emily. So are you." Her eyes filled with emotion she tried very hard to hide. That is the problem. Later that evening, after Emily went upstairs, I found Ethan standing alone on the back terrace. Snowflakes drifted slowly through the cold air. The lights from the mansion glowed behind him. I stepped outside and pulled my coat tighter around my shoulders. "You will freeze out here." "Probably." His breath formed small clouds in the darkness. "But it is quiet." We stood side by side looking across the property. The world seemed suspended in white and silver. Finally, Ethan spoke. "Emily is taking this harder than she admits." "I know." Silence followed. Then he surprised me. "So am I." I turned toward him. For the first time, there was no wall in his voice. No distance. No careful control. Just honesty. Ethan stared out at the snow-covered trees. "When you arrived here, I thought you were another employee." A faint smile appeared. "Then somehow you became the person who reminded me how to be a father again." Emotion tightened in my chest. "Ethan, you reminded me how to laugh." He shook his head slightly. "How to live." Neither of us moved. The winter wind carried soft flakes across the terrace. "That was never my intention," I said quietly. "I know." His eyes met mine. That is why it mattered. The look we shared lasted only seconds, but it felt much longer. There were 1,000 things neither of us said. 1,000 feelings hidden beneath the silence. Then Ethan looked away first. "When do you leave?" "Saturday morning." He nodded once. The answer seemed to cost him something. "Then I suppose we should make the most of the time we have left." As we walked back toward the mansion, I could not shake the feeling that something important was slipping through my fingers. And judging by the expression on Ethan Blackwood's face, he felt it too. Saturday arrived too quickly. By sunrise, my suitcase sat beside the front door. The mansion was quiet. The same mansion that had once felt enormous and unfamiliar now felt strangely like home. Snow covered the grounds in a smooth blanket of white. The moving car I had hired would arrive in less than an hour. I stood in the foyer taking one last look around when I heard footsteps racing down the staircase. Emily threw her arms around me before I could say a word. "You have to visit," she said immediately. "Every month." I laughed softly. "Every month. At least." Her eyes were already shining. "Promise." "I promise." She held on for another moment before finally stepping back. A few minutes later, Mrs. Whitmore appeared with a small wrapped package. Then other staff members followed. One by one they said goodbye. The kindness nearly broke my heart. But one person was missing. Ethan. I told myself it was for the best. Goodbyes were easier when they were simple, clean, final. Yet as the minutes passed, disappointment settled heavily in my chest. Maybe he was busy. Maybe he preferred distance. Maybe that was easier for him too. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway echoed through the front entrance. My ride had arrived. I picked up my suitcase and walked toward the door. Emily followed silently. So did everyone else. Just as my hand touched the handle, another sound cut through the morning air. A second car. Faster. Urgent. Tires crunching across fresh snow. The vehicle stopped abruptly outside the front steps. The front door opened before anyone could react. Ethan stepped inside. His hair was windblown. Snow clung to his coat. He looked like a man who had been running late and knew it. For a moment, nobody spoke. The entire foyer seemed to freeze. Ethan's eyes found mine immediately. I thought you already left. His voice carried relief. He did not bother hiding. Not yet. He exhaled slowly. Then he walked toward me. Every step felt deliberate, certain. When he finally stopped in front of me, the room became impossibly quiet. There is something I need to say. My heart pounded. Ethan glanced briefly toward Emily before looking back at me. 5 years ago, I stopped living. No one moved. No one interrupted. I convinced myself I was honoring Claire by holding on to the past. His voice remained steady. The truth is I was hiding there. Emotion tightened in my throat. Ethan smiled softly. Then you walked into this house. His eyes never left mine. You gave my daughter her father back. He paused. You gave me my life back. The silence that followed felt almost sacred. Then, to my complete surprise, Ethan lowered himself onto one knee. Not with a ring. Not with a grand gesture. Just honesty. Pure and unguarded. Thank you, Grace. His voice was barely above a whisper. For reminding me that life is still happening. Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. Around us, nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. Because in that moment, we all understood something simple and beautiful. Some people change your life by staying forever. Others change it simply by showing you how to live again.